"You don't belong up here." Henry Langford's voice cut through the quiet rooftop like a warning siren, sharp and sudden, his eyes narrowing as Madison Blake stepped past the velvet rope, unnoticed by most, but marked immediately by his suspicion. She wore jeans, a plain black tee, and sneakers, her hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, carrying nothing that screamed wealth or power, yet every step she took resonated with quiet authority. The lounge was sleek, glass panels reflecting the setting sun over the city skyline, soft jazz humming from speakers tucked in corners, and for a moment, time seemed to pause as Madison approached the host's stand, where Henry's smirk barely masked his disbelief. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some turning discreetly to watch, sensing the tension but not knowing the story behind this silent confrontation. Madison's gaze didn't waver, eyes steady, calm, taking in the scene without fear or hesitation, understanding exactly what this moment represented and how often she had faced similar dismissals in her life. The host's hand hovered over a phone, ready to call security, but Madison didn't flinch. She let the pause stretch, letting the weight of her presence fill the room. She remembered the first time she had walked into a similar space, young and eager, only to be scrutinized and doubted because of her skin, because of assumptions about her attire, her confidence, the way she carried herself. Every whispered comment, every sideways glance over the years had sharpened her, taught her patience, and built a reservoir of power that was invisible to those who judged superficially. A guest at the corner of the lounge raised an eyebrow and whispered to a companion, "Is she lost?" Madison's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, just enough to acknowledge their curiosity without revealing the depth of her identity. Henry cleared his throat, louder this time, a little more force in his tone as if volume alone could assert control. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification," he said, his eyes darting briefly to a group of security personnel standing near the elevator. Madison opened her bag slowly, producing a sleek, black leather card holder, sliding it across the stand with deliberate calm, and when Henry's eyes flicked down, his disbelief deepened. He hadn't expected professionalism, hadn't expected composure, hadn't expected ownership of the room before the claim was even confirmed. A waiter paused mid-step, glasses in hand, sensing the shift in energy, the quiet but commanding presence of Madison anchoring the entire space, drawing attention without a single raised voice. The city lights began to twinkle as dusk settled, reflecting off the glass and metal surfaces, casting long shadows that seemed to highlight Madison's still figure. Henry's hands clenched, jaw tightening, a small tremor of uncertainty betraying the rigid posture he tried to maintain, while Madison's mind remained unshaken, cataloging every reaction, every glance, every subtle whisper from the patrons. And as she stepped closer to the panoramic windows overlooking the city, letting the skyline stretch behind her like a crown, her phone vibrated in her hand, a silent signal from the team inside the building, ready to confirm, to authenticate, to back the quiet but undeniable truth. She owned every inch of this space, every contract, every key, every responsibility, and soon, the world would witness that authority. Even as Henry and the guests remained frozen, caught between disbelief and awe, waiting for the next move, the next revelation that would flip the perception of power entirely. Henry Langford stepped back slightly, disbelief etched into his face as Madison Blake remained poised, her presence commanding every corner of the rooftop lounge without a single gesture of aggression. Guests shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, cameras discreetly capturing every moment, others whispering, their voices low but filled with curiosity, as they tried to piece together what was unfolding. Madison reached into her bag once more, retrieving a tablet and placing it gently on the counter, the screen lighting up with documents, contracts, and verification of ownership, each line glowing under the lounge lighting, undeniable and precise. Henry's eyes widened as he skimmed, the corners of his mouth twitching, unsure if he should feign authority or retreat from the weight of undeniable proof. Madison tilted her head slightly, acknowledging a young guest who had been filming silently, and with a subtle nod, she indicated that the truth was visible to all, that no one needed to raise a voice for reality to be seen. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below could not mask the tension now thick in the lounge, each heartbeat echoing in the sudden quiet, as every staff member and patron became acutely aware that the balance of power had shifted. Henry cleared his throat again, attempting to reclaim some semblance of control, gesturing toward the security personnel, but Madison's gaze, steady and calm, met each one in turn, communicating without words that the room itself recognized her authority. A murmur spread from one side of the lounge to the other, questions floating in the air. Who was she? Why had she not been treated as she deserved? And how had this situation escalated so quickly? Madison's hand hovered over the tablet, selecting a secure line to her executive assistant, her fingers pressing commands with deliberate precision, activating verification protocols, and authorizing full transparency. The screens throughout the building blinked as records were instantly updated, occupancy logs, key cards, and reservation systems all confirming Madison Blake's position, her rights, her control over every inch of the property. Henry's posture stiffened, the smirk now completely absent, replaced by a mixture of shock and the first hint of respect, unspoken yet unavoidable. Madison adjusted her stance, eyes sweeping the lounge once more, noting the shift in energy as some patrons began to stand, some cameras capturing every reaction, and others simply staring, understanding that this was not a confrontation, but a demonstration of calm authority, patience, and undeniable fact. She remembered past moments when similar situations had been met with doubt, scrutiny, and dismissal, and how each had prepared her for this quiet moment of revelation. A soft click indicated confirmation from her executive assistant, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. Madison lifted her head slightly, letting the gravity of her presence sink in, each gesture measured, precise, commanding without a single raised voice. The lounge had transformed from a space of casual observation to a theater of realization, the air charged with anticipation, disbelief, and a dawning acknowledgment of justice quietly asserted. Henry's voice faltered as he tried once more to speak, but the words seemed hollow against the undeniable truth now displayed before every eye in the room. Madison's gaze met his, calm but unyielding, and the guests around them began to shift subtly, some whispering to each other, some visibly impressed, others silent, all sensing that the rules had changed, that perception was no longer assumption but evidence, and that every reaction in this space had been witnessed, logged, and accounted for, leaving Henry and his staff to confront a new reality as Madison Blake's quiet authority commanded the rooftop lounge in a way that no words could diminish, and the unfolding outcome promised revelations far beyond the glass walls and city skyline surrounding them. The room had shifted completely, the subtle hum of conversation replaced by a quiet tension as every guest, employee, and onlooker absorbed the unfolding scene. Madison Blake stood near the glass railing, the city lights casting reflections across her face, each one illuminating a calm resolve that seemed to radiate through the lounge. Henry Langford stepped back, uncertainty flickering in his expression, realizing that authority in this space was no longer his to command. Madison moved with deliberate ease, approaching the host's stand, her hand brushing over the tablet once more to highlight the building ownership records, every detail clear, verified, and unassailable. A nearby patron, a young woman with a camera poised but hesitant, let out a small gasp, the kind that rippled across the room, pulling attention and drawing quiet murmurs from others who had been watching, the collective realization of Madison's position spreading like a silent wave. Henry glanced at the other staff, their faces tight with confusion and dawning comprehension. The smugness replaced by a tentative acknowledgment of facts they could no longer deny. Madison's eyes swept the room, landing on individuals who had questioned her, challenged her presence, and she offered them nothing but the measured stillness of someone in total command, each blink, each subtle gesture, communicating authority without a single raised voice. The skyline beyond the glass seemed to frame her like a silent audience, the setting sun painting warm golds and deep purples across the horizon, shadows stretching across the floor, highlighting the small but pivotal movements of her hand as she instructed her assistant through her phone, activating final verification protocols that would confirm her legal rights to the building and the lounge within. Guests shifted again, leaning closer, some taking discreet videos, others simply observing, a few whispering, trying to understand how such composure and quiet confidence could hold a space so completely, commanding attention without confrontation. Madison allowed the pause to linger, letting the quiet speak louder than words ever could, the hum of soft music and the distant city sounds fading behind the presence she projected. Henry finally opened his mouth to speak, but Madison raised a single hand, a simple motion that froze the room further, the gesture imbued with calm authority and the certainty of one who knows that power rests not in volume but in facts, in preparation, and in quiet persistence. The lounge became a theater of subtle revelation, each guest now aware that assumptions and judgments had no place against verified truth, that decorum and professionalism, when paired with unquestionable authority, could shift perspectives instantly. Madison's gaze never left Henry, steady, unwavering, and the employees who had doubted her stepped back, uncertainty etched in their movements. As the room itself seemed to acknowledge the shift, a quiet collective admission that the balance had changed, that the space was hers to command, and that the story unfolding was one of calm, yet undeniable power. A lesson in dignity and presence that would linger long after the final document had been displayed and verified, leaving Henry and the staff to confront the quiet force of Madison Blake's authority and the realization that no amount of doubt, disbelief, or hesitation could undo the truth now evident to everyone present. Madison Blake took a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the lounge, her presence commanding attention without a word, each movement measured, precise, as if the room itself bent to acknowledge her authority. Henry Langford shifted uneasily behind the host's stand, glancing toward the guests who had begun to lean forward in quiet anticipation, cameras in hand, the tension palpable yet silent. Madison's hand hovered briefly over the tablet, selecting a single document, then tapped it gently, sending a ripple of confirmation through the system, each screen lighting up to reflect her ownership, every reservation and access point now verified and visible to all. Guests murmured softly among themselves, a mixture of surprise and admiration spreading across the room as the weight of what was unfolding settled into their awareness. Henry's shoulders tensed as he realized that no argument, no gesture, could undo the truth now illuminated before every eye in the lounge. Madison's eyes scanned the space, noting each person who had cast doubt or questioned her presence, offering nothing but the calm, unshakable certainty of someone who had long anticipated this very moment. The young woman with the camera hesitated, then lowered it slightly, captivated by the composure and quiet confidence radiating from Madison, and a few others began to record, not for theatrics, but to capture the undeniable reality of the situation. Madison allowed a brief pause, the kind that fills a room with quiet gravity, letting the weight of verified authority settle over every table, every guest, every staff member who had been complicit in assumption or disbelief. Henry attempted another interjection, voice slightly raised, trying to reclaim command, but Madison's steady gaze met his, conveying more than words could, a silent assertion that fact and preparation outweighed bluster and assumption. The lounge seemed to hold its collective breath, the soft background music now, secondary to the unspoken shift in dynamics, every movement and glance amplified, recorded in memory, and in the quiet reactions of those observing. Madison adjusted the tablet slightly, bringing a final set of documents into focus, each confirming her position, every line and number removing any remaining doubt. Guests whispered to one another, some visibly impressed, others uncertain how to react to such calm authority, and Henry's staff exchanged looks of growing realization, the balance of power irreversibly altered. Madison stepped back, allowing the city skyline to frame her silhouette, the setting sun casting long reflections across the glass surfaces, and every eye in the room absorbed the message without need for drama or confrontation. This was control exercised with precision, patience, and undeniable verification. The murmurs grew into quiet acknowledgment. The staff hesitated, unsure, and the guests adjusted in their seats, the subtle energy of recognition spreading across the space. Madison's presence alone conveyed what needed to be understood, and every subtle nod, every measured gesture, reinforced that authority does not require volume, that patience combined with truth and preparation can command even the most skeptical of rooms, leaving Henry and the staff to absorb the reality that Madison Blake's quiet power was absolute, immediate, and fully acknowledged by everyone present in the lounge. A lesson in composure, control, and the enduring weight of verified truth. Madison Blake's eyes swept across the lounge once more, noting the subtle shift in posture of the staff, the way guests straightened slightly in their seats. The camera's now steady, capturing every detail, every flicker of realization. She allowed the room to breathe, a quiet pause that carried weight, as if each second stretched to emphasize the inevitability of what was unfolding. Henry Langford adjusted his tie nervously, the confident veneer slipping as he realized the control he had assumed he possessed was no longer applicable. Madison stepped closer to the host's stand, her fingers gliding across the surface of the tablet to pull up additional verification, every line of data, confirming her ownership, her authority, and the legitimacy of her presence in the space. A few guests leaned forward, murmuring softly to each other, their voices carrying awe, disbelief, and an unspoken acknowledgment of the quiet command Madison held. The subtle lighting reflected across the polished surfaces, accentuating her composed stance, the city skyline a vibrant backdrop behind her, windows reflecting the soft orange of the setting sun. Madison's gaze met Henry's directly, not with anger, not with accusation, but with the kind of calm assurance that left no room for challenge. A young woman who had been discreetly recording slowly lowered her phone, understanding that the truth of Madison's authority needed no embellishment, no dramatization, simply presence and fact. Henry gestured toward the remaining staff, whispering instructions, but Madison's measured glance communicated volumes, each person sensing the shift and the futility of further resistance. Madison tapped her phone lightly, a small action that sent a ripple through the network, confirming all credentials, all access, all records instantly, the system responding with quiet efficiency, leaving no ambiguity. Guests exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in quiet disbelief, others nodding in recognition, the atmosphere charged not with conflict, but with a dawning comprehension of undeniable control. Madison allowed a slow inhale, the kind that draws attention subtly yet unmistakably, and with it, the room seemed to synchronize with her rhythm, a collective recognition that patience, preparation, and unassailable truth were far more powerful than any loud objection. Henry's hands rested briefly on the counter, the tension evident, as he realized that every line of defense he had anticipated was neutralized by quiet presence and verified fact. Madison adjusted the tablet to show one final detail, a small but crucial element that left no question unanswered, the last confirmation that every record, every line of authority, every key to the property belonged to her. Guests whispered again, this time more decisively, acknowledging the shift, some standing slowly, clapping lightly, others raising cameras to record the moment with respect, understanding that they were witnessing a demonstration of authority without spectacle, power without force, and patience that outweighed assumption. Madison Blake's stance remained steady, unwavering, the city behind her glowing. The lounge transformed into a space of recognition and respect, Henry and his staff now fully aware that their assumptions had been quietly and completely overturned, and that authority, when exercised with certainty, verification, and calm determination, leaves no room for doubt, challenge, or dismissal. A lesson absorbed by everyone in the room without a single raised voice, a demonstration of dignity, power, and the quiet force of truth. Madison Blake allowed herself a brief moment to observe the reactions around her, the guests leaning slightly forward in their seats, whispering in quiet astonishment, while Henry Langford's posture grew increasingly tense, his attempts to assert control fading under the undeniable weight of verified authority. She moved with calm precision to the center of the lounge, letting her presence speak before any words, the soft light from the floor-to-ceiling windows casting a glow that emphasized her composed demeanor. Guests continued to murmur, some raising their phones to capture the moment, their whispers carrying both curiosity and admiration, the energy in the room shifting from subtle tension to an acknowledgment of quiet command. Madison's fingers hovered over the tablet once more, opening additional verification screens that displayed building records, ownership documentation, and access logs, each line confirming what had already been evident to anyone paying attention: her complete control of the property. Henry glanced toward the security team, attempting a final assertion, but Madison's steady gaze conveyed far more than words ever could, a silent assertion of authority that left no room for challenge. The lounge seemed to stretch in slow motion as Madison allowed the room to absorb the reality, every glance and whisper a testament to the shift in dynamics, her calmness contrasting sharply with the growing unease of those who had doubted her. A few patrons, initially hesitant, now began to stand, some adjusting their cameras to record the scene, their movements deliberate, capturing not spectacle but a demonstration of composure and truth. Madison took another measured step, her eyes meeting those of the staff who had questioned her presence, her expression neutral yet commanding, communicating the unspoken lesson that authority grounded in fact and preparation outweighs assumption and volume. The city lights beyond the glass shimmered, reflecting across the polished surfaces of the lounge, adding depth to the scene, as if the skyline itself bore witness to the assertion of quiet power. Madison's assistant confirmed the final verification protocols with a subtle nod, her hand brushing lightly over the tablet to activate the last sequence of confirmation, reinforcing every access point and security measure under Madison's ownership. Guests shifted in their seats, some whispering, others simply observing, the energy now a mixture of respect and awe, the room fully aware that the previous balance of perception and power had been irrevocably altered. Henry's attempts at authority faltered as Madison's calm assurance filled every corner, the staff exchanging looks of realization and hesitant acknowledgment, the weight of undeniable truth settling over them. Madison allowed herself a slow, deliberate inhale, letting the quiet resonate through the space, reinforcing the understanding that her presence, her preparation, and her verified authority could command without confrontation. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long reflections across the lounge, every individual present sensed the profound shift, a demonstration of power exercised with composure, patience, and undeniable truth, leaving Henry, the staff, and the guests fully conscious of Madison Blake's control and the quiet yet complete redefinition of authority within the rooftop space. Madison Blake let her eyes linger on the patrons as they gradually adjusted to the revelation of her authority, a subtle smile tugging at her lips as she observed the ripple of acknowledgment spreading through the lounge. Henry Langford, once brimming with confidence, now fidgeted behind the host's stand, realizing that every skeptical glance and whisper of doubt had been met with calm verification and undeniable truth. Madison shifted slightly, her movements smooth, deliberate, a silent demonstration of composure that reinforced the room's understanding that authority need not be loud to be absolute. She touched the tablet lightly, bringing up an overview of building access and occupancy that confirmed every statement, every claim she had made, each line of data glowing with certainty under the warm lighting. Guests turned subtly in their seats, some leaning closer to capture the full context, others whispering to companions about the quiet yet commanding presence that had reshaped the energy of the space. Madison's gaze swept past Henry to the staff who had questioned her, offering a measured, unflinching look that conveyed acknowledgment of past errors without anger or accusation, a calm that both humbled and impressed. The soft ambient music faded into the background as the room absorbed the full impact of her methodical demonstration, and a few patrons who had initially remained neutral now whispered among themselves, acknowledging that the balance of perception had shifted entirely. Madison's fingers hovered briefly over the tablet before tapping once more, initiating the final verification step that linked all building credentials, keycard access, and reservation records in real time, a seamless confirmation of her authority. Henry's hands clenched subtly, uncertainty creeping into every movement as he noted the synchronized acknowledgment from guests, patrons, and the staff alike, the room now fully aware that every assumption had been rendered irrelevant. Madison stood back, shoulders relaxed, allowing the quiet gravity of her presence to permeate every corner, the reflections from the city skyline highlighting her poised figure as dusk deepened, painting the windows with gold and amber light. Guests shifted again, some capturing the moment on their phones, others simply observing, all attentive, understanding that they were witnessing a lesson in calm, patient command, where preparation and verified fact replaced guesswork and assumption. Madison's gaze returned to Henry briefly, steady and unwavering, and in that silent exchange, the power dynamic had been irreversibly redefined. A clear, unspoken message that composure coupled with authority and evidence could command a space more effectively than any argument or assertion. The lounge, once a simple gathering of patrons, had become a theater of realization, each subtle movement and reaction contributing to the acknowledgment of her control, a quiet demonstration of the weight of preparation and the impact of verified truth, leaving every individual present with a lasting impression of Madison Blake's unassailable presence and the profound effect of dignified authority quietly exercised. Madison Blake paused briefly, letting the room settle into an almost tangible silence. Each guest and staff member acutely aware of the shift that had occurred, the soft murmur of conversation now replaced by an attentive stillness, as if the lounge itself recognized her authority. She moved slowly toward the panoramic windows, her reflection merging with the city skyline behind her, the fading sunlight casting a warm glow that highlighted her composed expression and unwavering stance. Henry Langford fidgeted behind the host's stand, his attempts at asserting control muted by the undeniable evidence displayed on Madison's tablet, every document, every access log, every line of verification reinforcing the reality that she held complete authority over the building. Guests craned their necks to observe, some leaning forward to record discreetly, others whispering softly to one another, their expressions a mixture of admiration and disbelief as they absorbed the full context of the situation. Madison allowed her gaze to sweep across the room, noting each subtle reaction, every gesture of acknowledgment or tentative acceptance, and with a small, controlled movement of her hand, she indicated the full confirmation of her ownership and executive oversight. The staff who had initially questioned her presence now shifted nervously, their posture betraying the dawning comprehension of the undeniable truth, while Henry's face tightened, realizing that every assumption he had relied upon was now countered by evidence and composure. Madison tapped the tablet lightly, initiating the final confirmation protocol, the screen illuminating with comprehensive records, building credentials, and access authorizations, each element displayed clearly and accurately, leaving no room for doubt. The room responded to this quiet but unmistakable assertion, guests straightening in their seats, whispers carrying acknowledgment, and even those who had not been paying close attention now turned their focus, understanding that the balance of perception and authority had irrevocably shifted. Madison stepped back, allowing the room to absorb the moment, her calm demeanor reinforcing the lesson that power and influence are most effective when exercised with preparation, patience, and unquestionable truth rather than loud confrontation. The ambient light from the skyline continued to reflect across the polished surfaces, accentuating the subtle authority in her posture, every movement deliberate, every glance calculated to convey control without the need for words. Guests who had been hesitant now nodded subtly, some capturing footage with reverence, others exchanging quiet comments on the demonstration of composure and fact-based authority they were witnessing. Madison's eyes met Henry's briefly, steady and unyielding, communicating that the truth was absolute, that preparation and verified power outweighed skepticism and doubt. The lounge seemed to breathe with the realization, a space transformed from ordinary observation to a quiet theater of acknowledgment, every participant aware that Madison Blake's presence had redefined the room, established an irreversible shift in dynamics, and set a precedent of dignified command that resonated silently but powerfully throughout the entire rooftop space. Madison Blake stepped forward, the city skyline reflecting in her eyes, every glance around the lounge registering the mixture of surprise and quiet admiration among the guests and staff alike. Henry Langford's attempts to assert authority were now muted, his gestures small and ineffective, as Madison's calm assurance filled the space, a presence that needed no words to command attention. She tapped the tablet lightly, bringing up a final series of verification documents, confirming her ownership and executive rights over the building. Every line clear, precise, and visible to all, leaving no room for doubt or argument. Patrons leaned forward, phones raised discreetly, some whispering to companions, others simply observing. As the energy in the room shifted from tension to recognition, the transformation subtle but unmistakable. Madison's gaze swept the room slowly, noting each reaction, the way the staff shifted slightly in their positions, the cautious respect forming in Henry's expression, and the quiet acknowledgment of patrons who had only moments before been uncertain or skeptical. Her hand hovered over the tablet, initiating a final command that synchronized building systems, access points, and security protocols, all confirming her authority in real time, a seamless demonstration of preparation and verified power that spoke louder than any argument. The soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant traffic sounds from the streets below, and the fading music all receded as the room absorbed the gravity of her presence, a quiet force that left no doubt in anyone's mind. Madison allowed a slow, controlled exhale, a gesture subtle enough to be unnoticed yet significant, reinforcing the idea that authority is not in volume or theatrics, but in certainty, preparation, and undeniable fact. Guests began to murmur quietly, exchanging glances, recording moments, acknowledging the shift, while Henry's staff looked on with tentative acceptance, realizing that the previous balance of power had shifted permanently. Madison moved a few steps closer to the panoramic windows, letting the skyline frame her silhouette, the glow of the setting sun highlighting the calm determination in her posture, a visual reminder of presence and control. She caught the eyes of several patrons who had been documenting the unfolding moment, offering a subtle nod, a quiet acknowledgement of their awareness and attention, and the lounge responded collectively, a room transformed by composed authority rather than confrontation. Madison's steady gaze returned to Henry, communicating silently that the facts and verification were absolute, and the subtle shift in his posture mirrored the realization that no further challenge could alter the situation. The soft reflections from the glass, the muted ambient lighting, and the attentive audience combined to create a space where authority, preparation, and verified truth reigned, the room itself bearing witness to the quiet yet complete demonstration of power and composure, leaving every individual present fully aware of Madison Blake's control and the lasting impact of her dignified assertion. Madison Blake shifted her weight slightly, letting the subtle movement draw attention without a word, her presence commanding the lounge as the city skyline deepened into twilight behind her. Guests leaned forward, eyes tracking every gesture, some whispering quietly, others raising phones to capture the quiet assertion of authority that had transformed the atmosphere. Henry Langford's attempts at interjection faltered, his voice lost among the murmurs and the weight of documented truth displayed on the tablet before him. Every document, every access log reinforcing Madison's position. She tapped the tablet lightly, bringing up the final confirmations of executive control, occupancy, and building systems, the screens glowing softly, casting reflections across the polished surfaces and illuminating the faces of staff and patrons who now recognized the shift in power. Madison's gaze scanned the room deliberately, taking in the subtle adjustments in posture, the quiet acknowledgement from patrons who had doubted or questioned her earlier, and the staff whose uncertainty now gave way to reluctant respect. The soft hum of conversation had transformed into a charged silence, a room holding its collective breath, every eye observing, absorbing, and understanding that the authority in this space was now anchored in verified fact, preparation, and composure. Madison's hand rested on the tablet, her fingers poised but still, a visual representation of calm control, signaling the completion of a sequence that left no doubt about ownership and executive oversight. Guests exchanged discreet glances, whispering their recognition, while some recorded the scene, understanding that they were witnessing more than a confrontation. They were observing a masterclass in authority exercised quietly and effectively. Henry's posture slumped slightly, the tension in his shoulders visible, as he realized that his previous assumptions had been dismantled by precision and patience rather than confrontation, that every gesture he had relied upon was now obsolete in the face of Madison's verified presence. Madison allowed a subtle exhale, the kind that carried weight without noise, reinforcing the room's understanding that power is most compelling when paired with calm certainty and undeniable truth. The lighting from the skyline reflected in the windows, highlighting Madison's composed stance, and the lounge seemed to transform around her, each guest and staff member adjusting to the reality that the balance had irrevocably shifted. She stepped slightly toward the center, allowing the tablet to remain visible, letting the calm assertion of control resonate without a single raised voice, demonstrating that preparation, clarity, and verified authority outweigh any previous doubt or hesitation. Madison's eyes met those of Henry again, steady and unwavering, and the subtle change in his expression, along with the quiet acknowledgment of staff and guests, reinforced the completion of her demonstration. A room now fully aligned with the undeniable reality of Madison Blake's presence, her authority, and the effective, composed execution of power that required no theatrics, only patience, preparation, and truth. Madison Blake allowed the room to settle into a measured quiet, the hum of conversation replaced by focused attention as guests, staff, and even Henry Langford absorbed the reality of her presence and authority. She moved slightly closer to the center of the lounge, each step deliberate, her posture calm yet commanding, radiating a confidence that drew the eyes of everyone present without a single word being spoken. Henry shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the tablet and then back at the guests, the initial defiance in his expression now tempered by the undeniable verification displayed before him, confirming Madison's complete ownership and executive oversight. Madison tapped the tablet gently, pulling up an additional screen that outlined detailed building operations, showing staff assignments, security access, and reservation history, every entry precise and aligned, leaving no room for doubt. Patrons leaned in, some whispering softly, others raising their phones to document the unfolding scene, the quiet tension replaced by a collective understanding that the balance of authority had irrevocably shifted. Madison's eyes scanned the lounge, noting each subtle gesture of acknowledgment, every tentative nod from the staff, the quiet fascination of the guests, and the realization on Henry's face that he could no longer control or define the narrative within this space. She allowed a controlled exhale, the kind that draws attention subtly yet powerfully, reinforcing the unspoken lesson that authority rooted in fact, preparation, and calm presence outweighs assumption, speculation, or superficial judgments. The soft glow from the city skyline reflected across the glass and polished surfaces, highlighting her composed stance, every line and movement reinforcing the demonstration of measured, undeniable power. Guests continued to murmur among themselves, some recording, others simply observing, all attuned to the shift. The room transformed into a space of recognition and respect without any confrontation or raised voices. Madison's gaze returned to Henry, steady and unwavering, communicating silently that every claim, every position, every prior assumption had been methodically addressed and corrected, and the staff's posture reflected a cautious respect, an acknowledgment that the truth had asserted itself completely. The energy in the lounge had changed, subtle yet profound, a recognition that authority is most effective when exercised with clarity, patience, and verified fact. Madison's hand hovered over the tablet one final time, confirming access, verifying records, and ensuring that every detail aligned with her ownership, her oversight, and the demonstrated reality of her command. Patrons shifted slightly in their seats, some exchanging quiet comments, others straightening with understanding, as the room collectively absorbed the impact of her quiet, methodical, and absolute demonstration of control. Madison Blake stood poised near the panoramic windows, the city lights glowing behind her, the reflections on glass and polished surfaces emphasizing the calm strength and presence that had reshaped the lounge entirely, leaving every individual present aware that authority exercised with preparation and verified truth carries a weight that cannot be challenged or ignored. Madison Blake allowed the lounge to absorb the full weight of her presence, her calm authority radiating through every corner. Each guest, and staff member, now fully aware that the dynamics had shifted irreversibly. She moved deliberately toward the center, her steps measured, her posture exuding quiet confidence, every gesture reinforcing that control need not be loud or confrontational. Henry Langford remained behind the host's stand, tension evident in his posture, his attempts to reclaim authority muted by the clear, verified evidence displayed across the tablet screens and building systems. Madison's hand hovered briefly over the device, tapping to bring up final confirmation documents, occupancy records, and access logs, each line perfectly aligned with her claims, reinforcing the undeniable truth of her position. Guests leaned forward, whispering to each other, exchanging glances that reflected a mixture of surprise, admiration, and comprehension, some subtly adjusting cameras to capture the precise moment that authority was demonstrated without spectacle. The staff who had earlier doubted her presence now shifted subtly, posture straightening, recognition dawning as they processed the quiet but absolute shift in the room's balance of power. Madison's eyes swept over the lounge, meeting gazes with a measured acknowledgment, not accusatory, merely confirming that the evidence and preparation spoke louder than any prior assumptions or skepticism. The soft lighting from the skyline reflected across the glass and polished surfaces, illuminating her calm expression and composed stance, each reflection reinforcing the quiet gravity she projected. Henry's expression faltered further as he realized that every line of authority he had relied upon was now rendered obsolete, replaced by the certainty and precision of Madison's verified command. Madison allowed herself a slow, controlled exhale, signaling patience and composure, demonstrating that true power is exercised through preparation, clarity, and unquestionable fact rather than noise or confrontation. Patrons continued to murmur softly, the energy shifting from tension to recognition, some recording discreetly, others simply observing, each acknowledging the profound change in perception and authority. Madison's gaze returned to Henry briefly, steady and unwavering, communicating without words that the truth was absolute and immutable, every assumption countered, every doubt addressed. The lounge now felt transformed, the space infused with a subtle, pervasive acknowledgment of Madison Blake's command, a demonstration of authority that relied on presence, patience, and preparation rather than theatrics. Guests adjusted in their seats, nodding quietly, whispering to one another, capturing the scene for posterity, all aware that they were witnessing a masterclass in composure and verified control. Madison stood poised near the panoramic windows, the fading sunlight casting warm reflections across the polished surfaces, the city skyline forming a luminous backdrop, every element of the lounge reflecting the calm, methodical, and unassailable authority she now exercised. The room itself seemed to recognize the shift, every person present aware that Madison Blake's presence had redefined power and perception within this space, leaving Henry, the staff, and the guests with an enduring impression of quiet, undeniable command, and the profound impact of authority grounded in truth, patience, and preparation. Madison Blake stood near the expansive windows, the twilight cityscape behind her casting a golden glow that mirrored the quiet command she had established throughout the lounge. Every guest and staff member now understood, without question, that the balance of authority had irrevocably shifted, the energy in the room taut yet controlled, each subtle movement and reaction acknowledging her presence. She allowed her eyes to sweep slowly across the space, noting the tentative nods of the staff, the whispered recognition from patrons, and the brief, reluctant glance from Henry Langford, whose posture had shifted from defiance to hesitant acknowledgment. Madison's hand moved slightly, tapping the tablet to finalize the verification sequence, the screens illuminating each detail of building access, reservations, and executive authority, confirming her control in a way that left no room for debate. The quiet murmur of conversation became a soft acknowledgment, a collective understanding that authority exercised through preparation, verification, and calm presence was absolute and undeniable. Guests leaned forward, some recording discreetly, others observing intently, all sensing the significance of what had just been demonstrated, a lesson in composed leadership and patient execution of power. Madison allowed herself a subtle smile, the kind that conveys satisfaction without triumph, knowing that her actions had reshaped perceptions and reinforced a principle that words alone could never achieve. Respect and authority are earned through preparation, composure, and verifiable truth. Henry Langford glanced at his team, the realization dawning on them that their assumptions and previous judgments had been overturned without confrontation or spectacle, replaced by undeniable evidence and measured execution. Madison adjusted her stance slightly, the reflections of the city lights dancing across the polished surfaces of the lounge, enhancing the impression of calm dominance, a presence that needed no amplification, no dramatics, only clarity and control. Guests continued to exchange whispers, some nodding appreciatively, others tilting their cameras to ensure they captured every detail, understanding that they were witnessing an unspoken masterclass in authority. Madison's gaze returned to Henry for a brief moment, steady and unwavering, communicating that the room now recognized her control, her preparation, and her right to command without further dispute. The atmosphere in the lounge had transformed completely, every subtle shift in posture, every glance, and every quiet acknowledgment contributing to a collective recognition of undeniable power and composure. Madison Blake allowed a slow, deliberate breath, letting the silence carry weight, reinforcing the lesson that true authority is measured not by volume, but by preparation, presence, and unassailable truth. As the city lights deepened and reflections shimmered across the glass and polished surfaces, the lounge remained in a suspended moment of acknowledgment, every individual present absorbing the quiet yet complete demonstration of power, respect, and composure, leaving Henry, the staff, and the guests with a lasting impression of Madison Blake's command and the enduring truth that authority exercised through clarity, verification, and patience resonates far more profoundly than any raised voice or immediate reaction could ever achieve.